Hello, everybody. Happy end of your Saturday night. I am coming to you live once again. My name is Monica Guzman, and I am going to continue my Cap Anson series. I switched the topics yesterday. I switched the topics between tomorrow and tonight. I'm actually going to give you the opportunity to keep getting to know Cap Anson before I dive into the meat of the topic that's most relevant to Cap Anson, which is that Marxists in MLB have attempted to turn him into a villain, same way some attempted to turn Ty Cobb into a villain. So I flipped the topics. Tonight, it's the final uh, stream of getting to know Cap Anson, and then tomorrow we're really going to dive into the meat of Cap Anson and what's, again, the way they've tried to turn him into a villain. So just a reminder, Cap Anson was born Adrian Constantine Anson on April 17th, 1852, and he passed away April 14th, 1922. He got into the Hall of Fame by way of the Veterans Committee, and I'm assuming that it occurred that way simply because he had already passed away. So they let him in through the committee as opposed to voting him in the way Babe Ruth, Christy Mathewson, Honus Wagner, Ty Cobb, and Walter Johnson got in the first time around. And then obviously Cy Young got in on the second ballot. Cap Anson played 27 seasons at first base. He is American baseball's first superstar. By many accounts, even those written 5 years ago, that's the way he's still described, as American baseball's first superstar. He ended his career with a batting average of .331. Home runs weren't a thing in those days, so he only ended with 97. RBIs, he had 1,879. He only struck out 294 times. He played a total of 2,276 games and had 9,101 at-bats. And he had, there's a little controversy. I believe a couple different sites have different numbers on the number of hits he ended up with. Right here, I have written down that he ended with 3,011. But I believe it goes up a little bit higher depending on what site you're looking at. He was a 2-time batting champion, and he was an 8-time RBI leader. So this guy was a baseball player. I read somewhere that he came out of retirement in his late 40s to play again, I guess, at that time. Again, baseball in the late 1800s, before Babe Ruth, was waning. It was going through its up and down as it was growing into itself. It was still in its infancy. Again, you've got players forming their own league for a while, and then they get back together, and then you've got Van Johnson doing his thing, and so things finally started to really settle down once Babe Ruth hit the scene with the Red Sox. And so Cap Anson, when I read his book, I was intrigued by the character of this man, because I've encountered men today that have similar characteristics that he did, but portions, not as a whole. So Cap Anson in many ways was the whole package. I mean, his bloodline is just amazing. That stretches all the way back to England when it first set up its navy. His ancestors go all the way back to greatness. Greatness ran through his veins. The guy is amazing. Um, he he had his 4 daughters. They had sons, but unfortunately, none of them made it. And all he wanted for his daughters was for them to be like their mom, and he took care of their mom. His dad is also a character. He was accused of betting a cow on a game. A.G. Spalding called him out on it or something. So they weren't perfect either. These men weren't perfect, but they were pretty great. I mean, Cap Anson's dad founded Marshalltown, Iowa. It's just an amazing bloodline, and he is an amazing American that probably because he has nobody to come to his defense, Marxists and MLB can get away with turning him into a villain, which I am doing my part to say, yeah, that's not going to fly. They did the same thing with Ty Cobb. Sorry, that's just not going to fly. These guys were Americans living on American soil. They were just being Americans, and 100 years later, other cultures and Marxists are going to decide that they're villains. Sorry, that's just not going to fly. So what I want to do is walk you through Cap Anson's early years, because again, I've met guys that have had these characteristics, but not all in one. And I think it's interesting. So because what I'm doing is I'm tying in American baseball history with American history with what's happening today. And it's not good. There's a new study out there that says the majority of Gen Z can't get into the military either because they do drugs, they're overweight, they have convictions, or they have a record. So Gen Z is really falling to the wayside. I think they tried to do that to my generation. And again, I'm on the tail end of Gen X. So I watched The Breakfast Club for the first time a few weeks ago, and I do not understand the fanfare around that movie. At least I don't relate to that part of Gen Z, which is, it's older than me. And I've said before that I feel that part of Gen X, is more like the baby boomers than they are to me. But I've got a theory behind that too, which I'm not going to get into too many details about tonight, but it will be on future streams. I think I understand why there are differences within a generation. It depends on where you are in your Americanism. For example, I'm first generation American, and I think there's a difference between a first generation American Gen X versus a third, fourth, fifth generation Gen X. So I think that plays a role in it too. But again, I've in my years, I've met portions of Cap Anson in real life. And so while I was reading his book, I found it interesting, and I've said that a lot, but because again, I'm just comparing to the quality of the young men of today, which we've got to do something about it. And that's part of the project that I want to embark on starting early next year. And again, this is a build-up toward that. I'm trying to figure out who's more or less on the same page as I am, as far as not just talking about this stuff anymore, but actually taking much needed action. It's time to stop whining about things. It's time to stop depending on the government. They're not on your side. Americans no longer run this country. You guys have to start really accepting that and acting on it. And Americans aren't violent. When that thing happened in Michigan, because the governor of that state was being authoritarian, the Americans that headed over in that direction and were armed, there were no shots fired. So Americans protect themselves, but they truly abide by, you don't shoot unless you're shot upon first. And so I know that this stuff that I'm talking about, and I know this, other people are talking about the same things, but from a different perspective. Nobody's advocating violence, and I don't believe Americans are going to act in a violent manner either, unless shots are fired upon them first. So, again, there's no need for violence. It's just not what Americans do. I mean, they threw tea over the harbor to protest what England was doing to the colonists. That's extremely nonviolent, but yet it was extremely effective, right? They really liked their tea in those days. And it's very English, right? I'm trying to find the right page of my notes. I apologize. I know I gotta fix all this stuff. Okay, so one of the I read a post by one of MLB's Marxists. He said that, or he wrote that, as he was reading Cap Anson's book, he kept writing notes and he kept calling Cap Anson a jerk and can't believe he said that. Can't believe he felt that way. That's very typical of Marxist males, right? They get their feelings hurt by words that others say and apparently write. And so I was like, okay. Now, in his book, Cap Anson acknowledges several things, one of which was that he was the most troublesome from his brothers. So he didn't like to study or work, but that doesn't mean he was lazy. To him, the schoolhouse was like a jail cell. And I want to emphasize that this was in the late 1800s. This is before public schools became bureaucratized the way they are today. So Cap Anson was just your typical young man. How many young men out there, Americans, want to be trapped in a classroom several hours a day, several days a week? I remember my guy friends weren't into it. They wanted to go play sports. They wanted to talk amongst themselves. They were interested in other things. Being in a classroom was painful for them. Now, I was not in classes with everyone else. I was in AP classes and I was in the gifted program, so I was often separated from the general population at school. But those were my friends anyways outside of the classroom. We again, we weren't nerds, but I think it's because we were first generation American. We weren't nerds. We had intelligence, but we had interests. I mean, some of our football players were extremely intelligent. Our cheerleaders were extremely intelligent. Dance, student council, yearbook, newspaper. We were spread out. We weren't just hitting the books and being what nerds are today. We we weren't outcasts. We blended all with each other. And but again, I think it's because we were first generation American. So Cap Anson, same thing. He saw the schoolhouse as a jail cell. Um, he was punished for skipping school, but he points out that it had little effect on him. Uh, he kept doing it anyways. Um, he he um he got sent off to higher education. I guess his dad thought that it was going to fix him. His brothers also went to higher ed. So Cap Anson first went to the State University of Iowa, and that didn't work out. So then he got sent to the University of Notre Dame. And the goal was to put a harness on him. The goal was to break him. And it still didn't work. He had a brother who was more into studies. He also played baseball, I believe. And the brother was more, they were able to put a harness on the brother, but it was not extremely successful with Cap Anson. And again, that's very typical of young men. I am not shocked by this at all. Cap Anson wasn't a nerd. He was an American, red-blooded, right? And so while he was in school, higher education, he played sports. One really cool story that Cap Anson tells in his book, and again, I know someone who did stuff like this, and so it's funny to me. So Cap Anson wasn't into school, but he also didn't want to work. There was wood that needed to be splitted. His dad went away on some sort of business trip. So what Cap Anson did, because his father was going to pay him for the task, Cap Anson outsourced it. He paid some kids to split the wood for him, and he paid them with cookies and donuts. And so I guess when his dad got back, he saw that the wood had been splitted, and somehow he figured out, I guess he noticed that there was missing pastries in the kitchen of the establishment that he was running. And then he realized that Cap Anson had outwitted him. And again, that's just, how can you get mad at somebody who figures out how to get a task done the most efficient way possible? Cap Anson didn't hurt anybody. He didn't cheat anybody. He just found a different way to get something done. He inherited his love of sports from his dad. He was close to his dad. Even though Cap Anson was difficult, he shot, played ball, played poker, and fought with his dad. So his dad was a big presence in his life. And we all know that that's part of what's happening with young men today, is they don't have an American male influence in their life. We've got a lot of single moms, right? That means that there are less children, namely guys, without their fathers in their lives. We know that the Black community is most impacted by this, but now we're seeing the effects of it being an impact on American males as well. Another cool thing about Cap Anson, and so, okay, I have not watched Field of Dreams. I know Kevin Costner is big into the sports movies, but for some reason that just hasn't caught my attention. Maybe it's the way that they advertise it. It doesn't do it for me, so I've never watched it. And so I had to look up what the Field of Dreams is based on, because when I started reading about Cap Anson and his dad founding Marshalltown, Iowa, I was like, wait a minute, Field of Dreams isn't that in Iowa? So I was like, is it based off of Cap Anson? But obviously it can't be because they're turning him into a villain. But nonetheless, Cap Anson did build his own baseball field. There was a public square that his dad donated to the community. And so what Cap Anson did, even though he didn't like to work or study, he grabbed an axe and he started chopping down trees that were situated on that public square, and he ended up building his own baseball field. He used the elms for shade. There was a low picket fence, and the lawn was described as velvety. So he cared for it. And this is one of the reasons why those people in MLB who cry about there's not enough money for equipment, for fields, for kids to grow up and play baseball, you know, you just, I mean, how do you want me to say this nicely? You guys are just, there's something behind your money grab, because Cap Anson built his own baseball field by himself. And there's this cool picture that got tweeted several months ago. It's a scene in New York City, maybe Brooklyn, maybe Bronx, somewhere in that area from the 1940s. It's these kids, American kids, playing baseball, and I think they've just got like a stick and some sort of makeshift base pads. There's no equipment. I don't think any of them have gloves on. I don't think any of them have real equipment, the kind of equipment that MLB believes kids need in order for them to grow their love for the sport. That's why I think I question the motives, and I'm not sure if I want to go as far as questioning their intelligence, but something's behind it, because if kids would figure it out. American kids would figure it out, how to play baseball on their own if they really wanted to, on the street, when there's no cars going by, during traffic and stuff, off of the main roads, not in busy intersections. I'm thinking rural towns, obviously not cities. So again, I have not watched Field of Dreams. And as I was reading this, I was like, wait, is there a connection between Cap Anson, Iowa, and Field of Dreams? But I don't think so. So Cap Anson is extremely honest in his book. He talks about the incident he had in Marietta with some Indians. I guess him and his friends headed over to their area and watched some sort of celebration that that tribe was having. And I don't know if they instigated something. I don't know if the Indians were upset that these American kids were watching what was going on, even though they weren't invited. But there was some sort of incident that caused the Indians to chase them back home. And all these, he's honest about it. That's why what an Irishman from Michigan found out about Cap Anson in 1983 while he was researching something. And I want to point out that this man has very close ties to the Negro Leagues. So I question his motivation for making it such a point to attack Cap Anson in that manner, because Americans just don't do that. Americans don't do stuff like that. Americans go about their lives. Americans don't feel the need to put other people down to help them elevate themselves. It just doesn't happen. And so what's going on with MLB and this attempt to elevate the Negro Leagues, and it's happening in other sectors. Like, for example, how do you make a woman stronger than a man? You weaken the men. How do you make a woman more intelligent than a man? You dumb down men. So a lot of what's happening right now, this effort to disrupt the natural order, is being done by smashing the natural order down in order to elevate the unnatural. Okay, I happen to be born with some intelligence that ranks me higher than the average male, but it doesn't rank me higher than the top 1% of males. So even my own intelligence, side by side to men, it's not as high as theirs. It's limited. Just as a woman's strength will always be limited in comparison to men. I was gonna tell a story, but I'm not. But I found out firsthand. So I believe maybe it's been 2 years at this point. There was some women's soccer team that played against a boys soccer team, and the boys soccer team handily beat the women's soccer team. And I can tell you that I had an experience where I totally get that. Like, 12-year-old boys are faster than fast women. 12-year-old boys just have more stamina. They are not as strong at that point, but they can run pretty quickly and they've got pretty good reflexes. And so I believe that. And again, this disruption of the natural order, the only reason why it's progressing is because men are being weakened and dumbed down on purpose. So that's how you make women stronger and smarter than men. Otherwise, it's just not the way that, if you believe in evolution, it's not how we've naturally evolved. So back to Cap Anson. So again, he had a very interesting young adulthood life. When he ended up, after college, he ended up picking baseball, and then obviously he went pro. He grew up a little bit. I think probably marrying helped him grow up a little bit more. Definitely because he had to compete for his future wife. There was another guy that was in the running, and he really had to compete against this guy to land her. And maybe that forced him to mature, to grow up a little bit more, to come into his own. And because he did go back to school. I didn't pull out those notes, but Cap Anson talks about the things that baseball players used to do in the winter, because it's not like today where they're basically training year round. Back then, even during the Yogi Berra era, I guess Yogi Berra and another baseball or another Yankee, well, another baseball player, might have been a Yankee. They owned a bowling alley, and that's what they used to do in the off season. There was no year-round training. There was no going to these ranches that charge you thousands of dollars to engineer you into a better baseball player that you weren't born to be. So Cap Anson, one of the things he ended up doing during one of his off seasons, he went back to school. So he went to adult school and he studied business. And he's very happy that he did that because he picked up some accounting skills, some business skills that were good for his career. Because Cap Anson was an entrepreneur too, and he tried out several things. He ran some sort of winter uh, sports themed center. And he also had some sort of ginger beer business that literally blew up in his face. I guess something in the ginger caused the beer bottles to explode. And it was not a good business venture. But you know what? He was an entrepreneur, a great American. It's what Americans do, right? You guys try stuff, and if it doesn't work, you move on to the next venture until you get something that's pretty steady. Something else that I want to tie into is some people today, aside from Michael Kay and Don LaGreca, wondering why people treat American baseball like church. Something else that gets brought up is, and this is more from the MLB media, they wonder why fans romanticize baseball so much. There's good reason for it. It's really the same reason why American history can easily be romanticized. It's because it was. So something that I want to tie into. So Cy Young was definitely his own man. Cy Young was a farmer. That's what he did during his off seasons. He would go back home and he would farm. He did the splitting the wood thing. That's how he kept in shape, basically. And that's probably one of the reasons why he wasn't, like today, injury prone, right? I believe Cy Young retired because he realized he could no longer field bunts. And so the young kids would, when they faced him, would bunt, knowing that he couldn't get off the mound very quickly. And so that's one of the things that caused him to retire. So a book that I read on Cy Young, I'm going to read to you a paragraph that the author wrote because it just ties in to young men and the sense of urgency we should all have to help this specific segment of the population start thriving again. We need our young men to be healthy, to be stable. Society begins and ends with men. Without strong men, society collapses. And that's what's happening to this country. The obesity stuff, the video game stuff, the drug stuff, the convictions, it's not good. Especially since other countries that aren't very friendly to America are toughening up their young men. I don't think they're going to declare war, but young men, we need to make sure that they're healthy. Okay. So Denton, at 18, with his father's blessing, had left his home in Gilmore to try living in the Great West. He was in his element with his Nebraska baseball team, but as he looked about him, as he jogged along the road with his teammates, there was something missing that baseball could not replace. The New England-like hills of southern Tuscarawas County, Ohio. Dent Young had done what a great many other young men of the times were doing, responding to the romantic lure of the Western plains. So why do people romanticize baseball? Why do people romanticize America? Because it is built on romanticism. Going west, exploring, was something that young men did to become men. Because at that time, again, they were marrying. The median marriage age was somewhere in the 19-year-old, 20-year-old range. And then for girls, it was 17 through 19 years old. So these guys had to grow up pretty quickly. And of course, lifespans were much shorter at that point in time. But young men had the opportunity to leave their homes, go west to California, I guess maybe Idaho, whatever Nevada was at that point, Arizona, to grow up. They would leave to try their hand at life. Cy Young did it. Cap Anson did it. Ty Cobb didn't do it, but I do believe that Christy Mathewson was probably the most intellectual of the first Hall of Fame class, but Walter Johnson kind of did something like that. And it's something that young men cannot do today. We don't have an outlet for them to leave, grow up, and then come back and start a family. It's why they're playing video games, they're doing drugs, they're, in a sense, wasting away as they become obese. And so, again, this is something that I want to work on, get off the ground next year. We need to provide our young men these outlets to grow up. They're not going to grow up in college. They're not going to grow up. They might grow up in a trade program. They might grow up in an apprenticeship, but they're not going to grow up in college. We are seeing how it stunts their growth. They become women worrying about the climate that's supposed to change and the environment that would be much healthier if we all stayed local, right? Because then we wouldn't be letting out as many emissions because we're driving all over the place or flying all over the place. So we need to give young men the opportunity to leave their homes, try their hand at something, and then come back as men ready to take on the responsibilities of growing a family. And of course, that means that we have to get girls off of their slut tracks, and we have to do the same idea for girls in a different manner. We need, like, a book that I want to read that I just have not had the chance is from Southern Charm. I can't remember her name right now, but basically the matron of that show, she wrote a book on Southern Charm for women, like etiquette and stuff like that. So I definitely want to learn a little bit about South Carolina, specifically Charleston, etiquette. I'm really curious about mannerisms and whatnot, especially as a California girl, because I believe that's one of the things that our young ladies lack. And again, as the technology progresses, these things, the negative things impacting the young generations are just going to get more powerful and take more hold over them. So we need to counter that. There needs to be a sense of urgency to start countering that as soon as possible. So anybody out there that's already working on that stuff, keep going forward, because we need to get around the tide, or we need to, because I don't think we can stop the tide, but we definitely need to figure out a path around it. And so I think that's it for tonight. Again, my goal for tonight was to let you get to know Camp Anson a little bit more. And because tomorrow I'm going to dive in to the meat of this stuff. Cap Anson isn't a villain. Cap Anson was just an American living his life on American soil. His dad helped found a town in Iowa He comes from a stellar bloodline that extends all the way to England when England was setting up its navy. So the reason why Cap Anson can be painted as a villain is the same reason why Americans are being called terrorists on their own soil. It's because Americans no longer run this country. Um, until you grab the power back and until you regain control of your country, this is how it's going to be for a long time. You guys are not going to, Americans are going to continue being sent to jail. You're going, the no-fly list stuff is going to continue. The discrimination is going to continue. A lot more guys are sharing their discrimination experiences. And again, I watched TV growing up. I watched movies and TV shows. So I grew up when Beverly Hills 90210 was a thing. And I've been rewatching some of those episodes. There's an episode in the late 90s. I believe they had graduated from high school. They definitely graduated from high school already. But the parents were still on the show because later on the parents are no longer there. There's a scene where Brandon and his dad are having a conversation. So this is definitely when they're in college. And Brandon's dad says to Brandon, the world is becoming less male and white, less white and less male. And I believe he's talking about the workplace. And so this is in the late 1990s. So this discrimination stuff against white American males didn't start during the Obama administration, for example. It's something that's been building up. And one of the mechanisms that they've been using to really roll it out is television. And I'm actually going to tweet out a relevant article. It's just a post from one of the, it's from Page 6. And it's very relevant to the discrimination that white American males are facing. And it's also relevant to what's happening. So I'll give you an example. Have any of you ever been to a restaurant where the waiter or the waitress was trying to shoo you out? Like, obviously, we know that their job is to turn over the table. The more people that come through their tables, the bigger their tips, right? And so I know I experienced that several years ago. We were out eating and we were out and I wanted to watch a sporting event. And so we went into one of the chain restaurants with the televisions, and they were really trying to turn over the tables though, but we were basically done eating at that point. And it was quite, they were just really obvious about it. And so what they're doing right now is they're trying to turn over their table. They are shooing out right now American white males from every facet, right? They want to get rid of you in corporations. They want to get rid of you on social media. They want to get rid of you from what else? I mean, basically it's the workplace, right? They're basically limiting how you earn an income. And so I'm going to lead in with that tomorrow when I get into Cap Anson isn't a villain. It's just an MLB Marxist thing. But again, this stuff has been percolating. Scott Adams tweets about it he used to talk about it when he was doing Periscope. I guess he's doing YouTube in the mornings now, but he said, so I believe it happened to him before he started Dilbert. He was told that he would no longer be promoted because he's a white male. And I don't know the time frame of that because he doesn't go into details. Like, he doesn't tell you what companies said that to him. He keeps it close to the vest, and that's fine. But we're seeing this stuff rolled out everywhere now. I mean, you turn on the TV, what do you see now, right? I mean, do you watch TV? The ratings say that you don't. So, but there's good reason for it. You're not the target audience anymore. Something that ties into that, this notion is Yelp went all in on labeling the businesses, which ones were Black owned, Hispanic owned, and that spectacularly backfired. In Los Angeles, apparently, businesses were begging Yelp to remove those labels because people were saying, okay, well, you're Black, you want to support Black business, so I'm going to support whatever owned business. And that shows you that even though the American population numbers are falling, I mean, LA, I don't know what the latest number is, but I know sometime in 2016, the white population in Los Angeles was at 32%. I don't know what the latest numbers show, but I mean, let's face it, there have always been Mexicans running around Los Angeles because, I mean, I guess that's one of the things that Mexican nationalists hang on to is that, well, this Southern California area used to be Mexico and they can't let go that Mexico lost the battle, right? So there have always been Mexicans running around LA, but the numbers were never huge. They're not as huge as they are today. And so I guess what did I say the other day? I don't have that information in front of me, but the white only population in the census was 66%, somewhere around there. And so that's still the majority. And you guys got to hang on to that majority because it can get way more sketchy than it is right now if those numbers continue to drop. Again, my theory is that America can easily become the next India with pockets of populations throughout the country that can't even communicate with each other because they all speak a different language. They adhere to a different religion. Even not having a religion's a religion, right? If it goes in that direction, it's not going to be good because it's only going to lead to poverty. Again, 60% of the Indian population lives on less than $3 a day. And obviously, it's a completely different culture, a completely different standard, but that's not American. Americans have a different standard, a different culture, and it would be quite, I mean, there are already slums across the country that are growing, but to go full on poverty would just be awful, especially since there's still time to prevent it from getting to that point. So I don't want to leave you guys on a bad note. Let's Cap Anson, great American. You guys should be proud. I know, just as an American baseball fan, I think he's spectacular. I don't know if I'll have it ready by tomorrow, but I haven't checked when, because I'm not a sports talk show, I'm not a political show, but there are some things that I'm going to cover because Curt Schilling should be in the Hall of Fame already. He hasn't, because the MLB media decided to retaliate against him because he spoke out against steroid use. Obviously, the MLB media, since the majority of the steroid use comes from the Latinos and then there's some blacks, you know, because MLB isn't run by Americans, what they're doing is they're propping up other populations, and those populations come with tons of problems, including domestic abuse, steroid use, cheating. So I am going to do some Hall of Fame stuff. I don't know when the Derek Jeter, even though he has no titles, induction happens, but I might end up doing like a Hall of Fame week then, and then I am going to do a Hall of Fame week when the ballots get mailed out. Because again, Curt Schilling should already be in the Hall of Fame. No steroid users should be inducted. Barry Bonds used steroids. No, I mean, cross off his name. He did steroids. But this is the same MLB media that inducted some player. I can't remember his name right now, but he abused. What did he do? Did he abuse his wife and he got divorced and he cheated on her and they inducted him into the Hall of Fame? I mean, talk about not having a leg to stand on, MLB media. Like, you guys are just lower than sewer. So, I mean, you guys, the MLB media wants to turn Cap Anson into a villain, and there they are supporting steroid users and domestic abusers and cheaters, and okay, right, not that much credibility to lean on. Okay, so again, Cap Anson is an American who is living his life on his own soil. His dad founded a town in Iowa. Cap Anson built his own baseball field. Cap Anson was an entrepreneur. Cap Anson married and was faithful to his wife. He had a huge family. He is American baseball's first superstar. He is an outstanding guy. And tomorrow I'm going to dive into the meat. I'm going to try to come on a little bit earlier. And then I don't know how long it'll go. So I'm approaching an hour again. But Cap Anson isn't a villain. Cap Anson's just an American, being an American on his own soil. And I'm going to dive into the stuff, the meat of the Cap Anson stuff tomorrow night. I hope you guys will join me. Thank you to those who watch the streams on your own, on the replay. If you're dropping in and out, thank you for lending me your ear. You're allowing me to practice on you, which is kind of cool, because I'm preparing to move into my actual format in June. I will stream through the end of May, Saturday and Sunday nights. Again, I'm just trying to get this stuff, more comfortable with this stuff. This isn't second nature to me. So in June, I should have my format ready to go. I'll be switching over to mornings instead of nights at that point. So after my Cap Anson series, I'm going to talk about what is an American using baseball history examples from their writings. And then I'm going to do a thing on why we celebrate Memorial Day. Just a different perspective. I don't come from a military family, so I'm not directly impacted by the holiday, but I respect the country and I respect the military and the men and women who serve a higher purpose. Everybody's brave enough to do that. So, you know, we remember those who fell. And so I'm wrapping up. I will be back tomorrow. Definitely, I'm going to shoot for a little bit earlier, maybe 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, which I know is midnight New York time. But it's just, again, I'm practicing. You can always catch the replay. So I hope you guys have a good Sunday morning. I will be back Sunday night. See you then. Thank you. Good night.